Hello all, and welcome to this session of Vue Meetup Online presented by This.media. My name is Daniel Marin. I'm a software engineer at This.labs, and I'm going to be your host today. I want to have a highlight on our sponsor, This.labs, for this space. You can follow us at our Twitter handle, This.labs, or you can also reach out to our page, This.labs.com, where we have a bunch of really cool articles. And what to do? A few announcements real quick. We have a monthly mentoring session coming soon, Women in Tech. This is going to be on June 24th. We have also a Angular Online on July 2nd. Then we have a React Online Meetup on July 9th. And also we have a next session of Vue Online on July 16th. So follow us on this.media for more info on online events, blog posts, podcasts, and more. We're all the time doing all these cool events for you to learn more. And also, I want to announce something super exciting. We're so excited about this announcement. We're going to start doing soon again our monthly JavaScript marathon training. We're going to start on June 24th. And we're having such an amazing set of speakers that are going to be teaching you so much. We have React Suspense featuring Kenzie Dodds. We're going to have Build Angular Apps in Minutes featuring Brian Lagunas and Jason Beres. We have Effectively Using the New Vue Composition API featuring Jake Dom. We have Web Performance Diving into Lighthouse 6 featuring Justin Ribeiro. And we have Building an Issue Tracker API with Des.js featuring Chris Whited. And well, if you want to learn more, we have a blog post announcing everything. You can have here the URL if you're interested. If you want to, you can also ask in a comment, and I will just share the link with you. Is that easier for you? So for today, we have two awesome speakers. We have Ben Hong. He's a developer experience engineer at Cypress.io. And we have Natalia Venditto. She's a principal front-end engineer at NetCentric. She's a GDE for Angular and Web Technologies. So for today, we have this schedule. Well, I'm welcoming you guys right now. And then we're going to leave it to Ben, that's going to be talking about VuePress, Docs Made Easy. Then we're going to switch to Natalia Venditto. She's going to talk about Vue as a SPA solution in an enterprise context, when and how. And well, afterwards, as usual, you can ask questions, and we're going to try the speakers to answer your questions in the time we have available. With nothing more to say, I'll leave it up to you, to Ben, sorry. So you can go ahead and share your screen.
All right, sounds good. All right. Can you all see my screen?
Perfect. I can see it. If anyone in the stream doesn't see the presentation, please let us know. I can see it here. I think they also see it perfectly. So you can go ahead and take the stage.
All right. Thank you. All right, everyone. So as we sort of mentioned, today we are here to talk about VuePress, Docs Made Easy. Before we get started, I think we'll drop the links in the chat just for those. But in case you want to follow live, the slides are available at slides.com/bencodezen. And then the slide should be public, so you can just click on it there. And that way you have a copy of everything. So don't feel like you need to rush down and copy anything. It's all public and will be available after this talk. As far as a little bit about me, so I'm on the Vue.js core team, working primarily with the Docs team, and then doing some work with VuePress as well. Hence sort of why I'm here talking about this. And then, as mentioned earlier, I do developer experience with Cypress. And for those sort of looking for me on Twitter and whatnot, you can find me at bencodezen. And yeah, you can reach out to me there. All right, so let's set the stage a little bit. What we're gonna do is we're gonna learn how to draw an owl. And the reason this is important is because a lot of times when we walk into a library or a new piece of software, it feels a lot like we're trying to learn this new skill. And so a lot of times when it comes to documentation and tutorials, it feels a little bit like this. Step one, we say, okay, draw some circles. Step two, draw the rest of the freaking owl. Now, I don't know how much, this is a fairly common sort of meme that's gotten around, but it really does sort of give the sense a lot of times when it comes to teaching things that there's a lot of context and gaps that come into it. So, we read these, setup files and it's like, wait, what just happened? And And so, there's also this popular quote that's often said, which is incorrect documentation is often worse than no documentation, said by Bertrand Meyer. And so there's a great XKCD comic that sort of represents this. And so in case anyone can't see the screen or listening just via audio, it's a comic strip and it says the following text. It says, "Never have I felt so close to another soul and yet so helplessly alone as when I Google an error and there's one result. A thread by someone with the same problem and no answer, last posted to in 2003. Who were you, Denver Coder 9? And what did you see?" And so this is just it, right? It's become in this industry commonplace for us to rely on forums such as Stack Overflow to really answer our problems rather than actually going to official documentation. I'm sure some of you have had that experience where rather than actually go to the docs, you just jump straight to the thread. And in some regard, this is sort of a sad state of affairs for us because we know that a lot of times the very people who are writing the software and who have the, sort of the best answer, unfortunately, there's a disconnect with that in docs. And so, ultimately, it's gotten this sentiment where documentation that is both approachable and up to date is often hard to find. And so, I feel like a lot of times when developers sort of went through their training, they were all given this book to read. And so, again, for those who can't see the image, this is a play on the O'Reilly series. And so it's titled Essential Excuses for Not Writing Documentation. Instead of O'Reilly, it says, "Oh, really?" And there's a subtitle that says, "Where's the fun in just knowing what the code is supposed to do?" And so, all joking aside, when it comes to really these common obstacles, a lot of times what we're often dealing with developers is that documentation often exists separate from the code base. And we all know we're paid to either develop features or fix bugs, and oftentimes not actually to, write docs. That's never part of the ticket. Another issue is that a lot of times for those of us working on sort of enterprise sort of companies, we often are documentation is either living in like some sort of paywall. So whether it's in Confluence or some other system, this means that it's a bit of a pay to play in order to get inside and help contribute, or more importantly, only the employees can update. And especially when it comes to software that's open source and needs the user's feedback in order to really make it more robust, this can be a death trap for a lot of documentation. And so, as I mentioned earlier, the third one is that we're often not delegated enough time, right? There's often, we joke a lot that we don't even have time to write tests. So who is going to write docs when it comes to actually getting things out, and you have deadlines? So oftentimes, if we're not even writing tests, how can we expect people to write docs? And I know for me personally, a lot of times when it comes to documentation, there are times where you want to illustrate concepts a certain way. Like it would be more useful if you could either include a live embed, or you need to be able to switch the layout a little bit. And customization is just not really an option, which means your documentation is just that much less effective, even when you actually have people who want to spend the time to make sure that users are having an easy time using your software. A lot of times when you're in these sort of enterprise software, they're very limiting as far as what they allow you to do. So in the words of Michael from The Good Place, to paraphrase a little bit, good documentation is a rare occurrence. It's like a double rainbow, or someone on the internet saying, "You know what? You've convinced me I'm wrong." But thankfully, there is hope for us yet. For those who have been in the industry for some time, documentation has started to gain more traction, and more, especially open source projects, are spending more time and actually devoting resources to actually making the docs great. But for those of us who don't have dedicated content writers or people to do docs, there is hope for us yet. So back to our sort of initial claim that documentation that is approachable and up to date is hard to find. There's two parts to this. And so the first of it is that whether the documentation is approachable. Now, this in itself can not only be a talk, but can honestly be a workshop. And there's just so much to this, because the overview of it is that writing a documentation that's approachable requires you to not only have a beginner's mindset where you have to remember where people are coming from, but oftentimes we often forget that we have to account for a lot of cultural differences. While many of us do speak English, being able to write in a way that uses the right examples, that is not specific to, for example, American experiences and those things, and language that can be explored, not using idioms. This is a complicated topic, and so this is certainly another aspect to take care of for another time. And so when I first wrote this talk, it was Docs Made Easy. This talk really more accurately is called Docs Made Easier, because certainly there is the difficult part of writing the content. But here we're to talk about the second part of the definition, which is to make sure that your documentation is up to date, making it easy to maintain, making it easy to and fun to sort of work with. So enter VuePress. Now, what is VuePress? So its formal definition is that it is a static site generator with a Vue-powered theming system that comes with a default theme optimized for technical documentation. Now, some of you might be thinking like, oh my gosh, another static site generator. Yes, there's a lot out there, but VuePress in particular, I want to highlight one specific part of the definition, which is that it is optimized for technical documentation. This is its basically core purpose and why it was created and why you should consider it for your next project. So rather than sit here and sort of walk through some more slides, I figured it would be better to just go ahead and show a demo of what VuePress gives you right out of the box. So what I have here is basically a local environment of the actual VuePress docs. And so this actually right here is the generic theme that you get by default when you actually create a VuePress site. So to show you what that looks like in your code, one of the great things about VuePress is that it lives entirely in its own directory. So regardless of whatever sort of application structure you're using, it won't actually interfere inside of your package.json. It often, you can have it live entirely on its own. And so this means you can deploy it separately, but more importantly, this can live side by side with your code base. So going forward, if anyone's making a change, you can actually request them to go ahead in their pull request to go ahead and make those changes. And so that is a huge benefit when it comes to working with VuePress. So to show you what this homepage looks like, you'll see here that actually it uses the front matter syntax here, where basically this home is just a configuration just to say that we're using the home page layout, because everything else will be using an article page layout. You simply define the path where your hero image lives, which corresponds with this image right here. Your action text populates this button right here. And then you can actually define what link it is. And then you can define the footer on the very bottom. And like just by doing these things basically allows you to generate like this nice layout that lets people get started. Now, of course, you're like, okay, this is great. Like I'm a front-end developer. I know how to do this. This is not that impressive. So what makes VuePress really great is that everything is marked down first. So this makes it, as far as like, issuing updates and those things, makes it a lot easier. So in this sort of configuration, let me go to the config guide. One of the things that it affords you is that as you're writing as you can see here, it's just normal markdown, right? Heading 1, heading 2s with some code samples. All of this right here is being generated with automatic like syntax highlighting. Everything looks great. But more importantly, what it does for us, sorry, I meant to go to config reference, is that it actually can generate a sidebar for us by default. So this is actually reading the different headings and then going ahead and populating that so that users can go ahead and choose the one they're looking for and drop right down. And so this is done by simply basically toggling on the sidebar. More importantly, you can also configure your sidebar to hold certain sections. So, and that's simply a matter of updating your config file. So in this, if I go to the sidebar, you'll see that you can basically specify different sections of your site to populate different kinds of sidebars. So basically allowing you to compose together your content, which is really exciting. So again, and to show you what that looks like, the get guide sidebar, you see that really it's just an array of objects, and then you can give it like a title. In this case, this is where guide is being populated. And then you can determine whether it's collapsible or not. And basically you can define basically the children in which it'll live in. And then without even defining anything extra, you'll notice that it's actually pulling out some of the headings too. So again, all of this is done just like baked in. You don't have to think about it. As long as you're writing your content using just normal Markdown with the right headings and everything, like VuePress is going to take care of this for you. And so in addition, like we see like here, the top nav, right? You can have like drop downs that are automatically built in. Those are also just JSON objects that you can configure. And so the theme already is built in such a way that it's mobile responsive. So once you get down to a breakpoint, it will actually automatically have everything living inside of this collapsible sidebar. So all that is thought through for you. But then you're like, okay, like I can build those things. What else is this giving me? And so in addition, one of the things when it comes to open source documentation is that it's really hard when you want to know when was the last time this thing was updated. And so VuePress makes it very easy for it. It'll basically pull out the metadata on the document and then automatically print this out on your site to let users know, honestly, when's the last time it was updated, which can be very helpful in case something is out of date. It gives user that basically indication that like, hey, we might either need to check in with maintainers to see what's going on, or that maybe that's the reason that what I'm trying inside the docs doesn't work. More importantly, you'll see actually on the left-hand side here, there's also this edit this page on GitHub. So as long as you tell your basically your VuePress instance where your repo lives, it makes it really easy for people to then contribute back to your docs, because it'll open basically that file immediately inside of GitHub or GitLab in case you're using that as well. And then once you issue your changes, you can go ahead and basically submit a PR just from there directly. And we know that when it comes to user experience, the easier you can lower the barrier of entry for people when it comes to making those contributions, whether it's typos or those sort of things, like this can be a huge win. Just giving your developers or users that affordance of easily contributing back to the ecosystem. Now, the other thing that I want to keep in mind here is that you might have noticed that there's a search bar up here, and search is a notoriously difficult thing, right? We know that a lot of time is spent into it, but what's awesome about VuePress is that if I'm coming in here and I type something like manual setup, you'll notice that it actually has an autocomplete and can jump us to different parts of the site. Now you might be wondering like, okay, like what is this going to take? Do I have to like pay for another service? Do I have to do some crazy configuration? Nope. This is completely out of the box. At a low level, basically VuePress will go ahead and scrape all your headings. I believe it goes down to H3s at the most. And then basically generate like basically a auto-completable list that allows your users to search for things. And so while this may not be as robust as some other searching functionality, especially when you're an open source project, like getting that feature out of the box, it can be a huge win just because that's one less thing you have to worry about. Now, of course, for those working in open source, you're probably wondering like, oh, well, I use Algolia. They provide, basically a free license for open source projects. And so simply, if you provide VuePress that Algolia search ID, you'll notice here that like then you can basically use the Algolia API instead, and then it basically integrates seamlessly into the theme, and you don't need to think twice about it. So I've also mentioned as far as like, so this is great now from the user perspective. And then from a maintainer perspective, I mentioned that it's sort of Markdown first. And so this means that a lot of times when you're doing things, this will allow you to do a lot of things, common scenarios, as far as like things such as, let's see, custom containers. This is one of my favorite things. So just by using a triple colon and then giving an indication of what type it is, it'll basically output this nice little div that's basically rendered out for your user that makes it a tip, a warning, and whatnot. As I mentioned before, you also get syntax highlighting right out of the box. So Prism is already configured. You don't have to fuss with it at all. And then it even lets you do line highlighting, which is a pretty awesome thing. So basically all you do is you use your curly brace with the numbers that you're interested in, and it'll go ahead and output that properly for you inside of your docs. And of course, some of you may be thinking at this point, like, okay, like this is great. Like, can I extend upon the theme? And of course, this is just simply the default theme. And it's very easy for you to go ahead and build on top of that, or even create your own, go from scratch, totally up to you. But there is a theming system as well for you to explore. So we've talked through a couple of features from the user perspective. We've talked about the fact that you have basically this nice homepage that's ready for you to use. The nav bar is easy to configure. sidebar with automatic sidebar generation, or if you want to go manual, that's there for you too, to easily allow your content to be discoverable by your users. Edit links for your repo so that users can easily contribute back to your code and keep your documentation up to date. And also just automatically pulling out that metadata as far as when it was last updated. Those things are all pretty critical when it comes to a user experience on doc sites. And of course, the last, but certainly not the least important, is search functionality. So these are great things that VuePress offers you as far as out of the box. And then as a maintainer, it uses the front matter, as I mentioned before. You can see here, again, if I go to the homepage again, it allows you to basically define properties on individual pages. Sorry, this is the wrong one. It's the right one. There you go. You can find basically different properties on your individual pages as far as like metadata and those sort of things. So front matter works out of the box. Markdown first, since oftentimes when we're using products like this, most people are used to Markdown syntax. So this is helpful from a writing perspective. I show you some of the common extensions for Markdown that can make VuePress developing and writing in VuePress basically a very good experience. Talk about syntax highlighting. And then more importantly, so this is what we're going to highlight next, is that it has a Vue-powered theming system. This is the next part of what we want to talk about. So in the words of Uncle from Jackie Chan Adventure, which is one more thing, you can actually use Vue inside of your Markdown. So as we can see here, let me go ahead and then do this side by side. Let me go ahead and open the home page. So we can see here that if I go ahead and let me just update this part here, and I'll just put some H1 here that says hello. Stop. You see that this is now appearing here. So because this is, again, built in Vue, we actually have access to the Vue dev tools while we're working with this. So this means that we actually have access to a lot of things as far as the config property, page level site configs, and so even things like the front matter. So in the event, for example, we wanted to replicate like the action text, for example, it's simply a matter of using the declarative rendering you're already used to. And so it would just be front matter dot, what did I say? I said action text. And so once we say that, you'll see that the text is actually here basically and works exactly as you expect. And so basically all the things that you're used to in Vue basically are available to you. So you can go ahead and you can open up list items. You can loop through them, going over site config properties, if you have, let's say, social media accounts that you want to define in there. And so you can see here that if we scroll down, it's actually a site object where we could configure things and, what tags are in here. So let's go ahead and do this. So, so we'll say tag in site.head tags. And so again, I know I'm omitting the key intentionally here, but just for the sake of rendering this on the page, you'll see that I can basically get access to all this stuff and it can be programmatic inside of my Markdown. And so if that's already not impressive enough, you're probably thinking like, okay, there's probably something else I can do with this, right? And you would be right, because in the event you need to actually include interactivity, because it is extensible, basically it's of the Vue piece, we can actually write Vue components. So in this case, for example, this is a global Vue component where we basically created a sponsor for Bit. And so you can use your Vue components directly inside of your Markdown. And then it'll render exactly as you would expect it to in the Vue app. And it would actually have its own instance. So if you created like a counter and you wanted to update the current count, all of that is actually possible. So it really opens up the door as far as being able to be flexible with what's inside of your documentation and even provide live dynamic examples to make that experience for users that much better. Okay. So, but the key thing I want you to sort of remember walking away from this is that VuePress is not just for Vue projects. It's easy to think like, well, it's designed for the Vue ecosystem. And so I want to give you a few examples of this. So some of you, especially like whether it's a React community, if you're familiar, XState, which is a very sort of popular library that's gotten a lot of press recently regarding its concepts around state machines and state charts. They use VuePress for their docs. And again, they're not specific to a framework or whatnot. For those using the Peacock extension inside your VS Code to color your different workspaces by John Papa, he's using VuePress as well to write his docs. I know there's a bit of the Vue community out there as well using Craft CMS. You might see like this looks familiar. Craft CMS is also using VuePress. And the coup d'etat of the examples I have for you today is Netlify, which many of us know and love, is actually using VuePress as well to manage its doc site. And so, you know, a lot of these different teams, they don't necessarily use Vue in their day-to-day, but you know, when it comes to the affordances that VuePress does provide, clearly, as you can see, it's helpful enough that basically, as long as your project could use a doc site and you don't want to spend the time building your own, basically, VuePress is definitely worth checking out. So for those in the, you know, sort of who have been keeping up or might be following Evan Yu, who's the creator of Vue on Twitter, you might be wondering like, well, what about this thing called VuePress? Is this like, you know, should I even bother with VuePress? And so at this time, basically VuePress, for those that are wondering, Evan basically looked at sort of a new way to bundle and build like sort of a new build tool over like things like Webpack. And so it's basically a static site generator built on this sort of concept of technology. And currently it's experimental. And in the future, if we do decide to call it like VuePress 2.0 and we wanted to upgrade people, we'll be sure to have a migration path. But currently, I would consider it just experimental at this time. And so if you are looking to add a doc site, I would still stick with the VuePress because it's the most mature product. And we will be starting to keep you updated if anything should change about that. So as far as getting started, how do you get started? In the old days, we might have asked you to install like, you know, a global dependency to then create things. But for those that might not be aware, if you're using Yarn, there's this new pattern that's basically going on where rather than having you install something on your machine, like a global thing like VuePress CLI, that you're only really going to use like once, they created a way for you to basically run this sort of one-time install that will scaffold your project and then basically delete itself. So that it doesn't have to pollute your namespace. And so in the Yarn workspace, all you have to do is Yarn create VuePress, and then whatever directory name you decide. So again, assuming you're inside your Vue app or Angular app, doesn't matter. You just run this. It will then go ahead and prompt you to basically do a couple of configurations, and then it'll scaffold out a basic VuePress project for you right at the bat. And so for those that haven't spent a lot of time with this too, you might be wondering like, okay, what's the NPM equivalent in case I'm not like inside of Yarn? And I'm not gonna lie, I spent some time Googling and I was like, okay, Yarn create equivalent in NPM, and I got like nothing. But actually, for those who probably are a little bit more familiar, the equivalent is actually the new thing called npx. And so rather than just a create though sort of command, you simply run the create-VuePress repo. That's like the official way. So in case you're sort of wondering how this works, the repo is called create-VuePress, but Yarn basically assumes that the prefix here, and so you don't have to actually include the dash between. But so npx, you run npx create VuePress, same idea, run the directory name, and then it'll scaffold out everything for you. And of course, if you have any sort of questions for us, configuration, you can always check out the official docs at viewpress.vuejs.org. And as far as any questions, if we don't get to them inside of this talk, and you want to reach out as far as like, or if you have other questions, you know, be on the docs team, I'm happy to hear about your situation. If you're confused about anything, would certainly love to chat. You can reach out to me at hello@bencodezen.io, or like I said, I'm on Twitter at bencodezen. So thanks everybody for listening today.
Thanks, man. That was really interesting. I have to say that. And one thing that you really did very well is that you got a question in the middle of your presentation and you answered itself without even finishing. So you were able to answer the questions on the fly. That's really cool. I found it really interesting, your topic. I'm going to bring you up, Natalia. Are you ready with presentation?
Yeah, amazing talk, Ben. Thank
Thanks.
you very much. Really great tool.
We're all set. So I'm gonna leave the stage for you, Natalia. So you can go ahead and good luck.
Okay, thank you very much. So my name is Natalia Venditto, and thank you very much for the invitation to be here. I'm super excited because last week I was with This.Labs. I was with Danny as well. I did a talk with Angular Montevideo, and because yes, I am an Angular Google developer expert. I'm also a web technologies Google developer expert. I work as a principal front-end engineer at NetCentric, mostly with enterprise projects, for which, or for one of them, I am also in the role of front-end architect. And I'm here to talk to you about Vue in enterprise architecture and what is enterprise anyway. I know that many people are super familiar with enterprise. They maybe work in enterprise projects, but for some other people, this may be question, what is it? Basically, an enterprise app is a huge, massive project that supports Internet Explorer 11. Well, I'm just kidding, or sort of kidding, because it's true anyway, but there's more. So seriously, in order to understand how Vue may fit in a large enterprise architecture, we need to understand enterprise development in general, right? What is it? Enterprise scale apps are usually really big, that's for sure. And they're big because in essence, they're composed by an incredible amount of layers. And we're talking about maybe dozens of services, we're talking about hundreds of endpoints, we're talking about hundreds or even thousands of components. And those apps usually provide business solutions to the public sector, to large private consumer services like automotive and transportation and banking and myriad of worldwide leading product brands. They have their own enterprise platforms. And for these high traffic apps, because that's one of the features of enterprise applications, is that they have a very high volume of traffic with thousands of users, sometimes millions of users. The UX and the UI are very important. And hence the front end is very important. The front end deals with a lot of core functionalities. It connects to third-party APIs for authentication, for user data management, for e-commerce, for search, for cookies and GDPR acceptance here in Europe, for travel, location, payments, well, you name it. And everything is dealt, or sometimes is dealt in the front end, because in recent years, we have moved a lot of the business logic, a lot of the operations that used to be done in the back end to the front end. Business logic that typically was implemented back there, now we have to take care of that, especially when we're on top of cloud or serverless architectures. But let's park the serverless idea and let's focus in classical object-oriented patterns for enterprise architecture, which typically consist of a very complex infrastructure system, the servers themselves, the hosting with its web configs, the whole caching and delivering mechanisms. You also have then on top the backend layer with all the business logic, like we said, that now we're moving slowly to the front end. Then you find the services layer with typically dozens or hundreds of endpoints, providing all the services we already mentioned, such as authentication and user management, product management, asset management like media, and connecting to a bunch of different databases and more, right? And finally, we have the front end, which is, for us at least, the front end developers, it's the cherry to the cake, right? The most exciting part, the one we are interested in. So now we have the picture in mind, or this big picture in mind of all the things that are part of enterprise architecture. And the next natural question is, what influences the technological stack or the architecture decisions based on what we decide if we will use one framework or another, right? What makes us choose Vue over Angular, over React, or the other way around? Is it just preference or flavor? Is it somebody saying, I like one framework better? Sometimes it could be, but often it's not, right? Usually at enterprise level, it is not. At an enterprise level, it happens that a lot of the clients come with a specific request. Maybe because they have an in-house tech team that advises them, or they have a consulting partner, or sometimes just because they read the buzzword somewhere in a tech news feed. And we need to have the right tools, the right knowledge to better advise them, right? To tell them, okay, this may be the right tool for you or not. And when not a greenfield, and for those that never heard the term, a greenfield is a system that starts from scratch, basically. And usually enterprise projects are not greenfield. There is a pre-existing tech stack, whether it is infrastructure or is a legacy system that obviously plays a role in the final decisions. It can be an existing backend. It can be a CMS framework because they have already there a content authoring system. Because obviously enterprise, they rely on content generation. This is what they want to let people or reach people with, reach users with. Also, third-party service providers and their own delivery patterns may also influence our front-end decisions against or in favor of a framework or all of them. So maybe we have a set of REST endpoints to consume from, or it may be a graph, or it may be SOAP, or we are sent HTML chunks. Could be anything, right? So finally, the release models, if we have a continuous integration and deployment pipeline in place, or we have something less sophisticated, all of these may influence our final decision. But hold on, right? Because the very first question you need to ask yourself in enterprise, or when you are in the role of architect in an enterprise context, is, do we need a framework at all? And I know this may sound like an odd question, but it's a very valid question. So you need to ask yourself, what is the gain versus the losses? Can we achieve the same with plain JavaScript and HTML and CSS? How will it impact SEO? How will it impact performance in your particular context? And I bring up this question on top of the table because many front-end professionals who've never been in the architect role or never been participating of architectural discussions were never exposed to this dichotomy. Like, do we really need this? But at some point, they will. So this is the first question you need to ask yourself. And when you have it answered and it's yes, once you have that very important question answered, the second most influential factor to your decision should be the human one. And the human one means the team factor, right? And the team factor is intrinsically connected to certain constraints that the team leads, the architects need to pay special attention to. One of them is the time constraint, or maybe the most important. And not only because of delivery deadlines, but also because of learning curves. What framework or frameworks do the majority of the developers in our team have experience with, if any? Can best practices and patterns be implemented and peer-reviewed by more experienced members of the team for a particular framework? If the answer is no to all of these questions, does our team have time to learn a new framework? What is the real amount of time that we can invest in educating the team into a new framework? This is extremely important because you don't want to reach the time of opening a PR or a pull request and having nobody really being able to evaluate if the patterns used are the right ones for a framework or another. You need to have people that have a certain, connection or a certain experience with a framework to see that you're doing it right. Also, the team seniority and size is very important. The team and the team size and level of experience of that group of individuals. It's not the same to have a very large team of very experienced developers with 20 years of experience in Dino. Just kidding, just lots of years of experience, then counting with a mid-sized team of junior developers. So if we put together the team factor or the human factor, the existing technology, and the requirements we have for the future, we can have a clear indication of what's the best choice in each case. For a very, very long time, Angular has been the best match for enterprise scale apps, mostly because the Angular patterns and architecture are a good match with those of classical enterprise ones. And don't get me wrong, because I am an Angular developer expert, I still do think that Angular is the right choice in a lot of cases, and I love Angular. But let's propose a case scenario where we have a very important time constraint. Let's imagine developers not necessarily are very experienced with a framework or another. Let's imagine our team is composed of both very senior people, but also a lot of very junior people. And this is where Vue, for me, or in my opinion, is a real winner. This is not to say that Vue would not be amazing in a completely different context when you have all seniors and it's a very complex product you're going to have to make. But in this particular context, when you have a mixed team and a very, very strict time constraint, it is really especially ideal. So it is definitely easier to learn compared to frameworks like React or Angular. The Vue communities are very wide, very solid. They have representation in many countries, in many languages. The framework is well documented, which I saw Ben speaking about documentation. You have even tools to document it. And some other frameworks like Svelte, for example, do not have also a very steep learning curve, but they are not as mature. And when it comes to framework maturity or the lack thereof, it is definitely a deal breaker in general. But in enterprise, where you need a lot of stability, is even more so. So again, how stable it is, how well documented it is, how much presence in production environments that you can go to for reference, how many related solutions in Stack Overflow you can copy and paste from. Again, just kidding. Vue has great amount of add-ons and resources and a lot of activity in its core repositories and from their core community. So you're safe to go and ask. There's always somebody who's going to be there to help you. Also, a very important aspect when evaluating what framework to use is the tooling. Like Vue has an exceptional CLI providing easy ramp up and allowing you to be productive pretty much from the get-go, from the minute one. A really standardized build system. They have watchers for reload. You can have a simpler install. You can have a more complex one with Webpack configuration. You can have a boilerplate, and like I said, become efficient and productive right away. And productivity is very, very important in enterprise teams. Other frameworks also feature an excellent CLI. I'm not going to repeat, but remember, we're adding up here. We're adding up reasons why we can choose Vue as our enterprise solution to solve an enterprise problem. And also, like, we're talking about build tools, but let's imagine for some reason you don't want to have the necessity to integrate into a build system. Legacy systems, sometimes they don't have this underlying tool, these very base tools, and maybe you just don't have the capacity to do that. So you can also integrate Vue via the script tag, and that's amazing. That's how we used to do it in the past with jQuery, but now we have a very, very advanced framework at our disposal. Also, large enterprises platforms generally feature a great amount of views and routes. Sometimes you even have to map that to real physical path and resources, right? Vue has that very much solved with its default router. And it comes together with some advanced logical features like data fetching or guards, as well as some performance perks like lazy loading mechanism and some nice UX features like custom scroll behavior. All that really adds up to performance. And runtime performance, I think this is one of the ultimate benefits of Vue. Sometimes in an enterprise implementation, you need a framework for a very, very specific feature. I've been in this in this case many times, or I had this case to solve many times. Sometimes a framework will be initialized in a region of a page where you already have a lot of JS dependencies, because you are rendering a full page with a CMS framework, and then you initialize Vue in a small div, right, to serve a purpose, a specific purpose, like could be a faceted search, for example. So every kilobyte you can save is extremely important. And I think Vue really shines in this department. Not only they're providing you with easy integration, with tools that facilitate techniques like code splitting, like tree shaking, like lazy loading or dynamic imports per route, which is pretty standard to all major frameworks, but also with a considerable reduced size of the code you need to initialize the app to get it running, right? Also, when it comes to state, well, enterprise applications usually do very much need state management, especially if there is user management, because shaping a user journey and state based on user choices is very, very important for enterprise business. So we have integrated state patterns in Vue. We also have state management with Vuex, which is, well, a tool that if you're working in enterprise and you are going to be implemented Vue, for sure you need to get familiar with. Now let's go back to the case I mentioned before, where your Vue app is initialized in a region of a page of a larger system, and you are using already a Flux pattern like or tool like Redux, for example. And I have done this before very successfully. So you have this Redux store to manage the global state of your system, and then you have your Vuex store to manage your Vue application state. And you can kind of put them to work together. So you may not be able to set state from one to another, but you can definitely read state from one or the other and combine this data state knowledge to reconduct the journey of the user. So you can have them basically interact in a way. Finally, support for internationalization and localization is extremely important for enterprise scale apps, because they usually roll out worldwide. They're not delivered in one language only. So if you can't make sure to deliver localized versions, you are in trouble. And the Vue plugins ecosystem helps with that and with other features. So it also has integration. I think I read, because I never used this, I think for localizing or translating the UI, you have a service that is called Transifex. I was trying to read more about it, and it's like very easy to plug into your application. We can ask maybe Ben if he knows about this. So we are presupposing all along an underlying object-oriented pattern or system. We were doing so because historically the most used pattern in enterprise used to be object-oriented or classical. But I briefly mentioned some other types of architecture, like serverless, for example, like I mentioned cloud. How does Vue fit in or at an enterprise level with this sort of architecture patterns? The truth is that it fits amazingly. And let me talk to you about an example of that. For example, at NetCentric, where I work, we have this very specific system. It's obviously, like mentioned, enterprise scale. And it's on top of a very sophisticated content management system called AEM, or Adobe Experience Management, which is a CMS we deliver digital solutions on top of. And AEM is Vue's BFF. So if you never heard the term, this is not best friends forever. BFF means backend for frontend. And in this case, it works more or less like this. So authors write content using the CMS CRUD or authoring interface. The content is saved as assets in a public assets location. Then the CI pipeline generates endpoints through Lambda functions with Apollo and GraphQL. And finally, the Vue frontend consumes this data from those endpoints to render the frontend directly from the static assets and data combination, right? Of course, this is a very simplified diagram. If I would bring the real thing, it wouldn't fit in the screen. It has a lot more components to it. But it comes to show that we can use Vue successfully in enterprise, both for object-oriented patterns underlying, or not necessarily for other more modern types of architectures as well. So if we take a look at the network metrics, we can see that we have a very, very small initialization bundle. And a small bundle means performance, and performance translates into user retention, and user retention translates into money conversion. And that's the primary goal of enterprise apps. Now let's suppose you decide to be in, right? You want to go with Vue because of all the options we mentioned that we will recap. We have community support, we have a mature ecosystem, we have an easy learning or easy to pick up or very non-steep learning curve. We have great tooling, but there is still one thing you need to have before you start, and that's an opinion. One of the reasons why Angular is my favorite framework of all times for enterprise architecture or development is, or continues to be, because of its opinionated nature. And I know this may sound restrictive, but it's not. It's actually enabling, because when you have a very, very large distributed team working across time zones, which is usually how enterprise team works, you have some members of the team maybe all across the globe, and then you are there in the time zone, doesn't help. You seriously have zero chance to succeed if you're discussing 4 days about the way of doing things, because there are a dozen ways of doing things sometimes, and nobody necessarily may be wrong. Maybe everybody's right. There's just about preference or style. So that's a bottleneck when it comes to development that becomes disabling. So this is one of the reasons why we implement linters, for example, to have a certain framework to our framework. And I invite you as a team, if you go with Vue, to have an opinion on a few things and to have it documented from the start. And you can use VuePress for that. So first of all, draw a lot of diagrams. Do all that is possible to have the most complete requirement as early as possible, or from the very beginning. Because, yeah, in the enterprise world, this may be a bit difficult sometimes. You have to send your requirements engineer, you have to send your business analyst to talk with the client. A lot of times things change a bit later than desired. But even if it's not up to you, try hard, because this is the best way to have a complete picture and be able to decide how to split your app into components, to decide what are common utilities, and to have an early on a good code splitting and lazy loading strategy and design. Think also that you will have to be communicated with tons of external services, that you will probably need initialization or configuration data coming from a host system, from your backend to frontend. So you have to have dedicated shared and commons folders and files for that. Do not store common data in individual components, because then you will have a lot of duplication and over-engineering. Also decide early if you're going to be using a single file approach or not. This is entirely my opinion, but in an enterprise context, I would say probably not, because components can get really nasty huge in enterprise. So look at the line number for this screenshot I took, and this is not even half the component. The more you separate concerns in enterprise, the better. Also try to go with clean patterns, like the use of composition API versus options API. And I know that this may mean that all the abstraction and magic that makes Vue easier to understand and to ramp up with may go away, but it will result in a more organized and reusable code base. And this both for non-object-oriented and for object-oriented architectures, which will also benefit better the the object-oriented ones, from type inference if you are using, for example, TypeScript. I think there is a coming up meetup that is said on composition API, and I totally recommend you to take a look, or a workshop. Also, speaking about separation of concerns, you may have to do things in atypical ways in enterprise, different than you do in smaller or medium-sized apps. And those atypical ways may be the most optimal. Scoping CSS is awesome. I really like that. But it will prevent you from sharing CSS between components that are part of the application and those that are part of the CMS or on another system that is in connection. So the least CSS you write, the least CSS you have to maintain. This is, and we mentioned before, a very typical case in enterprise to have regions that are rendered by a CMS system while your app is bootstrapped to a particular div or region of the page. And both frontends are coexisting. Imagine, for example, the teasers in the CMS and the teasers in the Vue application, they would look the same. Because in enterprise, many times requirements change. They get extended, they get changed. And if you have different CSS sources for things that look the same, you're going to have to maintain them twice. You're going to have to keep up with those changes and updates twice. In the image we see on the right, the teaser gallery from search results, which is a Vue app. And on the left, the teaser gallery, which is a CMS, HTML plus JavaScript plus CSS. But they look exactly the same, and they are using the CSS from the same style sheet. If the requirement changes, like we said, in the whole site, we only have to update it once. And finally, don't forget what we mentioned in the beginning, the Internet Explorer 11 support. And Vue, albeit a very light framework, can be equipped with all the polyfills and loaders because, like we said, it has amazing tooling, amazing support, amazing community, and it's a very, very mature framework. So thank you very much. That's me in a workshop where I was deciding for Vue for one of our enterprise applications. So I thought it was cool to put that picture as the last one of this presentation. I will write a dev.to post and we'll post it or announce it in Twitter for everyone to read. So thank you.
Thank you, Natalia. Well, and also thank you, Ben, for being here and both giving this awesome talks. Let's wait for 2 minutes and see if someone has a question for you, Natalia, before we close the session.
Okay.
Or you, Ben, if you have anything you want to share, just go ahead.
Let's see.
So we got a question. I'm gonna bring it up.
Well, it isn't officially out yet, but it is usable already. It is available to be used already. It is fully functional as far as I know. And Ben can correct me if not, but I think there was even a plugin in the past for version 2, and now it's fully available and fully usable, let's say. And why it's best? It's best because you can better compose it. You can create or put together concerns when you are designing your components, and it's much easier to read. Whereas before you had some chunks of code that were dealing with the same but were separate in your components, now you have it with better composition and more integrated. And also because it exposes some underlying functions and features of the core of the application that were abstracted perhaps and you could not leverage fully, and now they are available for the developer to use. This is, I think, the greatest advantage, in my opinion. I for sure would like Ben to contribute to that response.
Yeah, I think you touched on a lot of great things. Certainly, there is a plugin for the composition API on Vue 2, but because it still like at the time was still going through some changes and Vue 3 is not officially released, we can't recommend it like officially on like a large scale, just because in case anything does change for Vue 3, we do want people to know it's still a bit in the experimental phase. But nonetheless, I do think I agree, like as far as its ability to compose together different features in a way that was hard to do with mixins without polluting global namespace and those things. Composition API would definitely be a huge help for those working on enterprise level apps. And for those that also aren't aware, like starting with Vue 3, there'll be first class TypeScript support. So I'm sure Natalia would be very happy to see that too, because enterprise, obviously being able to enforce your types and those things can be very beneficial. So that's certainly another benefit coming with Vue 3.
Awesome. Something I want to add really quick is that we're having in the JavaScript marathon, we're having a talk, just as Natalia brought up, about the composition API of Vue. If you're interested, here's a link I'm just posted in the comments a link to the announcement we did with all the information if you're interested in learning more about the composition API in Vue. We're out of time, so we're going to close the session for now. But thank you, everyone, for listening, for being here. I just want to remind, I just posted a comment. We have in the next session of Vue Online Meetup on July 16th, if you're interested. And thank you once again, Natalia and Ben, for being here, for sharing all your knowledge with the community. And we'll be glad to have you again anytime soon. So thank you, everybody, and see you soon.
Thank you. Bye-bye.